The year was 1865, and the plains had turned to iron. Winter clung to the soil like a curse, and the wind whistled over the Dawson homestead with the voice of 1,000 ghosts. Clara Dawson stood at the window with her shawl drawn tight, watching the horizon fade into gray dust and cloud. Her daughter, little Mary, dozed on the ragged quilt beside the fire, a doll pressed to her chest, the last gift her father had ever given before the war took him. The cabin creaked in protest against the cold. Clara's hands were rough and scarred, not from idleness, but from years of working soil that gave her little in return. The night pressed in thicker than tar. Clara had bolted the door, barred the shutters, and whispered prayers half out of duty, half out of fear. This land was full of shadows that wore men's shapes, outlaws, drifters, raiders who came by night to take what wasn't theirs. She knew the stories. She'd seen the aftermath. Still, she stayed. Pride and stubbornness stitched her bones together, and Mary needed a roof, no matter how cracked it was. The knock came just after midnight. It was a sound so alien, so sharp against the howl of the wind, that Clara froze with the poker still in her hand. A slow, deliberate rap, 3 times, then silence. Mary stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Clara's heart climbed into her throat. Nobody knocked at a lone widow's door at midnight unless they meant trouble. She waited, breath thin as thread. The knock came again, softer, almost pleading. She pulled the bar loose and cracked the door an inch. A shape sagged against the frame. A man tall but bent, his hat askew, his face shadowed. Blood trickled from beneath his coat, soaking the fabric dark. His lips parted, and with a voice rough as gravel, he whispered only one word: "Water." Then he fell forward, collapsing across her threshold. Clara staggered back, half ready to slam the door and let the night take him. But Mary stirred again, and the child's sleepy eyes blinked open to the sound of the body hitting the floor. Clara dropped to her knees, poker still in hand. She pressed it against his shoulder, ready to shove him back outside. The man's chest heaved shallowly. His skin was gray with fever, his pulse weak. He reeked of blood, gunpowder, and sweat. She could have left him. Should have. The world was safer when you didn't take in strays. Every instinct screamed for her to shun out. But then his eyes flickered open, storm gray, hard yet hollowed out with pain. Not the eyes of a predator, but of something hunted. Clara saw desperation there. The kind that went beyond survival, the kind that whispered of a man already half in the grave. She cursed under her breath, set the poker aside, and dragged him farther into the cabin. The door slammed shut behind her, shutting out the wind, shutting in her choice. She fetched the tin cup from the shelf and splashed water into it with hands that trembled. She tilted it to his lips. His throat worked like a man parched from weeks in the desert. He coughed, choked, but swallowed enough to still the rasp in his chest. "Thank you." The words grated out of him, almost lost. Clara laid him on the floorboards and peeled back his coat. The wound gaped near his ribs, gunshot, close range. The blood had clotted poorly, dirt ground into the edges. He'd been running hard. She pressed a rag against it, ignoring his groan. "You'll bleed out," she muttered. "You're a fool for coming here." But he only gave a half smile, the ghost of one. "Didn't choose." Her mind raced. If he died here, she'd have to bury him, and burying a man alone was a backbreaking thing. Worse, if he lived, she'd have a stranger under her roof, and strangers drew trouble. She cleaned the wound with what little she had, boiled water, strips of linen torn from an old dress, thread and needle meant for mending clothes. He grit his teeth through the stitches, body jerking with each jab, but never cried out. Only once did he open his eyes and lock them on her, and in that silence, something passed between them. Not gratitude, not trust, something rawer. When she tied the last knot, the night split with distant hoofbeats. Clara stiffened. The sound carried over the plain like thunder rolling closer. She rushed to the shutter, prying it just enough to peer out. Lanterns swayed in the distance. Riders. Her stomach dropped. They were coming fast, cutting across the land, their torches bobbing like fireflies. Men who rode with torches at night were not honest men. She turned back to the stranger. His lips twitched into something like warning, though his breath rattled too hard for words. Clara dragged him to the table, heaving his weight beneath it, and threw a blanket over the edge to hide him. She pressed a finger to her lips, though his eyes had already fallen shut. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then came the voices, rough, sharp, drunk on the hunt. "Check the house," one barked. Clara swallowed her terror, smoothed her hair, and pulled the door open before they could knock. 3 men sat their horses in the yard. Their coats were dust-caked, hats low, rifles slung across their saddles. The leader, a heavy man with a scar down his jaw, tipped his chin. "Evenin', miss. Seen anyone come by this way? We're looking for a fugitive." Clara stood straight in the doorway, the weight of Mary's breathing behind her reminding her what she had to protect. "A fugitive? No, sir. Just me and my girl here. Haven't seen a soul all week." The leader's eyes narrowed. His gaze flicked past her into the dim cabin. "Mind if we take a look?" Her pulse pounded. If they came inside, they'd find the bleeding outlaw beneath her table. She set her jaw. "It's late, and I've got a child sleeping. I'd thank you to move along." The second rider chuckled. "Mighty bold for a widow. You sure you ain't hiding something?" Clara forced her lips into a thin smile, though her hands itched to tremble. "I'm hiding nothing but hard work and empty cupboards. You're welcome to either." The men stared at her. The silence stretched like wire about to snap. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. "She's telling the truth. House is too poor to bother with." He jerked his reins. "Come on." The 3 wheeled their horses and rode off, laughter trailing behind them like a noose untied. Clara closed the door with a hand that barely held steady. She waited, breath caught, until the hoofbeats faded into the night. Then she dropped to her knees, yanking back the blanket. The stranger's eyes were half open, watching her. "Why should I save a killer?" she whispered, anger laced with fear. His lips parted, and with a voice ragged as torn cloth, he breathed. "Maybe because I'm already dying. Maybe because your kindness is the first thing that's touched me in years." Her throat tightened. She should have left him outside. Should have let the wind bury him. But she couldn't. Not when those words rang with the weight of truth. Mary stirred, padding barefoot across the floor, her doll dragging. She looked at the stranger with innocent eyes, then up at her mother. "Is he going to stay, Mama?" Clara hesitated, staring at the broken man bleeding on her floor, the outlaws already circling her life, the decision that would change everything. She whispered, almost to herself, "I reckon he is." And in that moment, with the storm still raging beyond the cabin walls, Clara knew the frontier had dealt her a hand she could never fold. Dawn came slow to the Dawson homestead, creeping in through ragged curtains and spilling pale light across the plank floor. Clara rose stiff from her chair by the hearth, where she had sat most of the night, listening to the stranger's uneven breathing. He hadn't died, though several times she thought he might. Each rasping inhale rattled like dry corn husks. But now, as the rooster crowed from the coop and Mary stirred awake with a yawn, he still clung to life. Clara leaned down, brushing her palm across his forehead. Fever burned hot beneath the skin, but his color had returned faintly. His eyes cracked open. They were gray, shot with red, and they fixed on her with quiet awareness. "You made it through the night," she said, her voice low, more observation than praise. He coughed, a harsh sound that shook his body. "Didn't figure I would." Mary toddled over, doll in hand, and stood before him with the frank curiosity only a child could manage. She held out a hunk of stale bread left over from supper. "Hungry?" The man blinked at the offering. For a heartbeat, he looked as though he might wave her away, but then his lips pressed thin, and he accepted it with a trembling hand. "Thank you, little miss." His voice softened, surprising Clara with its gentleness. Mary smiled and skipped back to the fire. Clara studied him. Last night, he had been a shadow spilling blood across her floor. Now, though still pale and broken, he looked more human. She fetched him more water, and when he had finished, she asked his name. He hesitated, gaze dropping to the cup. At length he muttered, "Elias." The name pricked Clara's memory. She had heard it before in hushed conversations at the trading post, in warnings traded across fence rails. Elias Turner, an outlaw whose reputation stretched from Kansas to Texas. Men called him the Butcher of Abilene, though whether from his days as a soldier or from what came after, no one seemed certain. Clara's hands stilled on the water jug. "Elias Turner." She said it aloud like tasting poison. "You're wanted." A shadow passed his face. "I know." Silence thickened between them. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and Mary hummed to herself by the fire, innocent of the truth that sat bleeding under her roof. Clara stood, straightened her shawl. "I ought to turn you in. They'd pay me for you." His gray eyes rose to hers, weary but steady. "Then why haven't you?" She had no answer. She busied herself at the stove, though her mind stormed. $500. That's what the posters promised. Enough to buy seed, mend the roof, maybe even hire a man to help run the fields. It was survival money, the kind she'd prayed for. But it would mean betraying the mercy she had already shown. The day wore on. Elias slept in fits, waking to drink water or mutter half-formed memories. Clara worked the fields with Mary at her side, her eyes forever drawn back to the house where the outlaw lay. Each time she returned, she half expected him gone, either fled or dead. But each time his eyes opened, and she found herself still unwilling to call the law. By evening, she saddled her mule and rode into town for salt and flour. The trading post buzzed with more than the usual talk. Bounty hunters had come through, asking after Elias Turner. Men leaned close over their drinks, trading rumors of his last fight, how he'd gunned down 2 deputies and slipped away into the night. The hunters swore they'd track him to hell itself for the price on his head. Clara kept her face calm, though her stomach churned. When no one was looking, she slipped a hand across the notice board. The poster stared back at her, Elias's face sketched in rough lines, beneath it the word wanted and the reward bold as brass. She crumpled it into her apron and left before anyone could mark her expression. Back home, she found Elias awake by the fire propped against the wall. He had dragged himself there, though the effort left his skin slick with sweat. He looked up as she entered. "You went to town," he said, as though reading her mind. Clara set down her parcels, lips thin. "I saw your poster." A muscle worked in his jaw, and she should have told him then that she meant to hand him over. But the words died in her throat. Instead, she said, "You've got the law on your heels. And bounty men. You won't last." His laugh was low, bitter. "Didn't figure I would anyway." For the first time, he told her a piece of his past. He had worn blue in the war, marched beneath banners that promised freedom and glory. But when the killing was done, when the smoke cleared, nothing was left but ruin. The army cast him aside. The land he returned to had been sold from under him. Men he once called brothers had turned to lawless ways. So had he. "Killing was the only thing I had left in me," he said, voice flat. Clara listened, arms folded. She knew the war's cruelty. Her husband had never returned from it. His absence had left her with a farm too heavy and a heart too hollow. Elias's story was not far from hers, only bent down darker paths. "You don't have to keep killing," she said. His eyes lifted, bleak and tired. "And what else am I? Killing's all I know." That night the wind shifted again. Dogs barked in the distance. Clara rose from her bed at the sound of hooves. She peered through the shutters and saw lanterns bobbing along the ridge, riders sweeping the land, hunting. She shook Elias awake. "They're coming." He groaned, trying to rise. Clara pulled his arm across her shoulder and half dragged, half carried him out back to the barn. She laid him in the loft, covering him with hay, just as torches flickered against her cabin walls. 3 men dismounted, rifles in hand. They pounded on her door. Clara answered, spine straight. "You again," said the scar-jawed leader, the same man from 2 nights before. "We're sure he came this way. Got tracks lead in near your place." Clara forced calm into her voice. "You're welcome to look, Though I told you before, you won't find anyone here. They searched the barn. One man climbed the ladder to the loft. Clara's blood turned to ice. He lifted his lantern, the glow spilling across hay and shadow. She stood below, heart hammering. Elias shifted, ready to spring. Clara saw it in the tensing of his arm. If he moved, he'd be dead. So she shouted, her voice sharp, "If you break my ladder, you can fix it yourself. I've had enough of your trampling." The man glanced down, sneered, then climbed back without probing further. "Nothing here." The raiders muttered, but the leader finally spat and waved them off. Their hoofbeats faded once more into the dark. Clara leaned against the barn wall, knees weak. Elias crawled from the hay, coughing blood. "You could have given me up," he rasped. She met his gaze, fury burning with fear. "So could you. You could have leapt down and damned us both. I saved you, because once someone should have risked it for my husband, and didn't. I won't make that mistake twice." He stared at her, words stuck behind his eyes. Then slowly, for the first time, he bowed his head. The days that followed bound them tighter than either wanted. Elias grew stronger under her care, though he never stopped glancing at the door as though expecting death to come riding through it. Clara found herself listening for his voice, sharp but honest, when the nights grew long. Mary followed him like a shadow, unafraid of the scars or the stories. But the danger only grew. Each time Clara rode to town, she heard whispers of bounty hunters circling closer. Men spoke of Elias Turner like a rabid dog, needing put down. She kept her face unreadable, though the poster in her apron weighed heavier with each passing day. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Elias sat on the porch with Mary on his knee, pointing at the clouds that looked like horses running wild. Clara watched from the doorway, her heart caught between dread and something softer, something she had not allowed herself since her husband died. "Why do you let me stay?" Elias asked later, when Mary had gone to bed. Clara looked at him, candlelight catching the tired lines of his face. "Because I see a man who's more than the name on a poster." His throat worked, but he said nothing. Instead, he leaned back, eyes drifting closed, as though her words had given him a moment's peace he hadn't known in years. And for the first time since she had laid him bleeding on her floor, Clara realized she no longer thought of him as a stranger. He was something else now. Something dangerous, something fragile, something she could neither keep nor let go. The air that morning carried a strange weight, as though the wind itself had paused to listen. Clara felt it the moment she stepped out to draw water from the well. The sky hung low with gray, the sun veiled, and the land seemed to wait for something unseen. She hauled the bucket up slow, every muscle taut with unease. Elias sat by the porch, sharpening a knife though his wounds still pulled at him. He moved stiff, but there was more strength in his shoulders than a week ago. His eyes, sharp and restless, followed the horizon as if he knew what the day held. "Storm's comin'," Clara said, setting the bucket down. He nodded, though his gaze never left the ridge. Not the kind with rain. Clara knew better than to question it. Men like him could smell danger the way coyotes smell blood. She went inside, set Mary to her chores, and kept her hands busy while her heart pounded with dread. By noon, the storm revealed itself. It wasn't thunder. It was riders. Dust rose beyond the ridge, 5, 6, maybe more. Their silhouettes grew sharper with each heartbeat. Clara's chest seized. She didn't need to ask who they were. Elias stood in the doorway, jaw set. "Bounty men." "How many?" "Enough." She swallowed hard. Her first thought was to hide him, as before, but the way those riders came on straight, fast, sure, told her there would be no hiding this time. Someone had spoken. Someone had pointed them here. And she knew who. Her neighbor, Mr. Harlan, had stopped by yesterday, too kind in his words, too long in his gaze. He had asked after her health, after her guest, his voice thick with feigned innocence. Clara had felt the trap in his tone, though she had answered nothing. Now, the price of that conversation thundered toward her in hoofbeats. Elias slid the knife into his belt and took up the rifle leaning against the wall. "They'll want me. Best you take the girl and go." Clara's voice snapped sharp. And let them burn my home behind me? No. If they want you, they'll have to come through me too. His eyes flicked to her, something like sorrow in them. Don't make yourself part of this, Clara. You saved me. That's already more than I deserved. She squared her shoulders. I'll decide what you deserve. The riders drew up before the cabin. Dust settled around them like smoke. The leader, scar-jawed and mean-eyed, swung down from his horse. The same man who had searched her place before. He smiled like a snake. Afternoon, miss, he drawled. Seems you've been keeping company with a man belongs to us. Clara stood in the doorway, Mary clutching her skirts. Her voice carried steady, though her heart thrashed. You've no claim here. This is my land. The man's grin widened. Law says otherwise. Elias Turner's wanted dead or alive. You've been harboring him. That makes you guilty too. Behind her, Elias stepped forward, rifle in hand. His voice cut the air like a blade. Leave the woman out of this. I'm the one you want. The bounty hunters' rifles lifted as one. The leader spat in the dirt. Alive's worth something. Dead's worth less trouble. Either way, we get paid. The air cracked. Gunfire erupted sharp and savage. Clara yanked Mary back, shoving her beneath the table. Elias fired from the doorway, dropping one rider clean off his horse. Another bullet shattered the frame, with splinters biting into Clara's arm. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the shotgun from above the hearth, and stood beside Elias. The world shrank to thunder and smoke. Men shouted, horses screamed, glass shattered. Elias fired again, his body jerking with the recoil, his breath ragged. Clara reloaded with trembling hands, then fired into the melee, the kick bruising her shoulder. One rider reeled back, cursing, blood blooming on his arm. The bounty men regrouped, circling wide. The leader barked orders, driving them toward the barn. Smoke them out. A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof. Flames licked up the dry wood, crackling, spitting sparks into the wind. Clara's gut twisted. If the fire spread, the cabin would be next. Elias cursed, clutching his side where blood seeped fresh. Still he fought, teeth bared, eyes alight with a fury Clara had never seen. For a moment she saw not the outlaw they'd painted him, but a soldier again, a man standing his last ground. Clara grabbed his arm. You'll bleed out. Not while you and the girl are still breathing, he growled. He shoved her back inside. Stay low. Guard her. But Clara would not hide. She stepped to the window, firing at the riders who tried to flank. Her shot dropped another horse, sending its rider sprawling. The smell of smoke thickened, choking the air. Mary whimpered beneath the table. The bounty men pressed harder. Bullets punched through the walls, shredding fabric, splintering wood. Elias staggered, dropped to one knee, then forced himself up again. His rifle cracked, dropping the man with the torch before he could reach the porch. Then a bullet tore into Elias's shoulder, spinning him back. He hit the floor with a grunt, blood pooling dark beneath him. No! Clara cried, dragging him behind the table. His eyes fluttered, but his hand groped for hers, squeezing weakly. Don't stop, he rasped. Make it mean something that... Her throat closed. She had not cried in years, not since her husband's death. But now the tears burned, blurring her sight. She pressed her palm to his wound, her shotgun braced beside her. The hunters outside regrouped, voices barking, boots crunching closer. The leader shouted, Last chance! Hand him over, woman, and we'll leave you and the brat. Clara's voice cut back like steel. Come and take him. Silence followed. Then the world exploded again. Elias forced himself up, staggering to the door with the rifle clutched in blood-slick hands. He fired, each shot burning what little strength remained. Clara covered him, her shotgun roaring. Together they held the line, fury and desperation binding them. One by one the hunters fell or fled. The yard grew littered with bodies, the dirt dark with blood. Smoke coiled from the barn, flames licking high. Horses screamed and tore loose, vanishing into the plain. At last only the scar-jawed leader remained, crouched behind a trough, his face twisted with rage. He rose, rifle leveled. Clara raised her gun, But Elias moved faster. He stepped into the open, drawing the man's fire. The bullet struck him square in the chest, staggering him back. But even as he fell, Elias's rifle cracked. The leader dropped dead, eyes wide, rifle clattering to the dirt. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. The fire hissed as rain began to patter from the gray sky, the long-awaited storm breaking at last. Clara dropped to her knees beside Elias. His chest heaved shallow, blood seeping through his shirt. She cradled his head, tears spilling freely now. "You fool," she whispered. "Why'd you do it?" His lips trembled, voice thin as wind. "Because you gave me something worth fighting for. More than water. More than life. You gave me a reason." His hand lifted weakly, brushing her cheek before falling limp. His eyes closed. For a terrible moment, Clara thought he was gone. Then his chest rose again, faint but real. Relief broke through her like sunlight. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering through tears, "You're not dying here. Not yet. Not while I still breathe." She worked through the night, binding his wounds with steady hands, whispering words of strength as Mary slept curled beside them. Dawn crept slow, painting the wreckage in pale gold. The yard was silent, but for the crackle of dying flames and the soft breath of the man who had fought for her. Weeks passed. Elias did not die. Bit by bit, he healed, his strength returning like grass after fire. He worked the fields with her, silent at first, then speaking more as the days turned warm. Mary followed him as always, her small hand slipping into his without fear. The neighbors whispered, the town muttered, but Clara held her head high. She had made her choice. Elias Turner was no longer the butcher of Abilene, no longer an outlaw hunted by every gun. He was a man remade by mercy, a man who had stood between her and ruin. In time, his name faded from the posters, replaced by others. Men forgot, but Clara and Mary did not. Years later, the land remembered too. Crops grew stronger, fences held firm, and laughter returned to a cabin once haunted by silence. Elias remained by their side, not as a fugitive, but as something rarer, a protector, a father, a man given a second chance. The storm broke at dawn. Rain came in sharp sheets, drumming the earth, flattening the prairie grass, and washing the blood from the dirt outside Margaret's cabin. It might have been mercy, or it might have been mockery, but the storm didn't care. It only swept the world clean, as though death could be rinsed away as easily as dust. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and iron. The hearth fire had burned low, its glow painting faint light across Margaret's face. She was bent over Caleb, her fingers trembling as she worked the last strip of linen tight around his ribs. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow but steady. He had survived the night. Though each hour had been a war, neither of them was sure he'd win. She pushed a damp lock of hair from her forehead and whispered, "You hold on. Do you hear me? You're not done yet." Caleb's eyelids flickered. He tried to speak, but the sound came broken, a rasp of effort. Margaret hushed him with a hand against his chest, a gesture both protective and commanding. The same hand that had fed her child now kept a dying gunman tethered to life. But outside, the world hadn't forgiven him. Through the rain, horses stirred. Shadows shifted at the tree line more than a few. Margaret rose, her body taut as a wire. She didn't need to count no, they were many. Sheriff Doolin had returned, and this time he hadn't come alone. A knock rattled the door, hard enough to shiver the wood. Then a voice, sharp and smug even through the storm. "Widow Lane, time's come. Hand him over." Her pulse slammed. She looked back at Caleb, his face as pale as ash, his breath rattling faint. He couldn't fight. He couldn't run. And yet the law demanded him, wounded or not. Margaret stepped to the door, rifle in her hands, the stock familiar and firm against her shoulder. She cracked it open just enough to see. Doolin sat high on his horse, slicker dripping, his mustache shining with rain. Behind him stretched a line of men, some deputies, some bounty hunters, others just eager with the scent of blood money in their nostrils. 15 at least. Their rifles were angled low, not yet raised, but ready. "Morning, ma'am," Doolin said, voice syrupy, false courtesy covering iron intent. "I'll not trouble you long. You've got a wounded outlaw inside, and I've got the right to collect him. Step aside, and this ends clean." Margaret's jaw tightened. Her finger curled against the trigger, though she didn't raise the barrel. "He's half dead already. You'll not drag him out like an animal." Doolin chuckled, leaning on his saddle horn. "He'll be dead soon enough. Only difference is whether he dies in there or swings in town, where folks can see justice done. Don't romanticize him, widow. Caleb Hart's no hero. He's a killer with a trail of graves behind him." The men behind him muttered assent, shifting in their saddles, eager for her answer. Margaret's voice came steady, though her heart thundered. "He asked me for water. That's all. I gave it, and I'll not betray him now." A murmur rippled through the riders. Doolin's smile thinned. "I don't want blood between us, Margaret. Folks respect you. But if you stand in my way, you will make yourself part of a story, and that story ends in the dirt." Her grip tightened on the rifle. Behind her, she heard Caleb stir, his voice faint. "Don't do this for me." She didn't turn. She couldn't. "Hush," she whispered, low enough he might not hear. Then louder, to the men outside, "If you mean to come in, you'll step through me first." For a heartbeat, silence. Only the rain spoke. Then Doolin's eyes hardened. He straightened, tugged his reins. "So be it." He raised his hand. The rifles came up. Margaret slammed the door shut, dropped the bar across it, and shoved her back against the wood. Her chest heaved, fear clawing at her throat. 15 rifles against 1. The odds were madness. But she had no room left for retreat. Caleb groaned, forcing his body up on an elbow. His voice was ragged, desperate. "Give me the gun. I'll end this." Margaret spun, fury flashing. "You can't even stand. You'll bleed out before you raise it." "No, Caleb, not like that." Their eyes locked. For the first time, she saw his, not the gunman's mask, but the man beneath, raw and stripped of all pretense. He saw her too, and something passed between them, sharp as lightning, binding them in the storm. The first shot cracked, a bullet splintering the doorframe. Wood flew, dust in the air. Margaret dropped to her knees, dragging Caleb down with her. The cabin, filled with the roar of gunfire, led chewing through wood, smoke burning the air. She crawled to the window, shoved the rifle barrel through the narrow crack, and fired. A rider screamed, toppled from his horse. Chaos rippled through the line. She worked the lever, fired again. Another man clutched his arm, howling. The return fire was merciless. Bullets tore through the roof, sent sparks flying from the hearthstones. One struck the table, shattering it. Another smashed the water jug, spilling its contents across the dirt floor. Caleb gritted his teeth, dragging himself toward the door, revolver clutched in shaking hands. His body betrayed him, every movement agony, but his will burned hotter than the pain. He braced against the wall, raised the pistol, and with grim focus fired through a gap. One shot, then another. Men cursed outside. Horses reared. Margaret reloaded. Her hands swift despite the tremor in her fingers. She fired again and again, each shot a prayer, each recoil a vow. Then silence. The gunfire ebbed, the storm reclaiming its voice. Outside, Doolin's shout cut through the rain. "Enough! Pull back!" The hoofbeats retreated, fading into the downpour. Margaret sagged against the wall, lungs heaving, ears ringing with the echo of shots. Her arms shook, the rifle slipping from her grip. Caleb slumped, blood seeping through his bandages anew. His pistol clattered to the floor. Margaret caught him before he collapsed fully, cradling him against her. "They'll come again," he whispered, his voice faint as the rain on the roof. "Yes," she said, her throat tight, "but we'll be ready." His eyes met hers, weary but fierce. Why save me, after all I've done?" She held his gaze, and in her own eyes burned something steadier than anger, stronger than pity, because no one else did. Because a man dying in the dust asked me for water, and I couldn't let him die alone. He closed his eyes, a sound between a laugh and a sob catching in his chest. His hand, rough and blood-stained, found hers, clung to it like a lifeline. The storm eased, its fury fading to a steady drizzle. The prairie stretched wide and endless beyond the cabin walls, a land still hungry, still unforgiving. But inside, a fragile breath of peace settled. Margaret laid Caleb gently on the bed, smoothed the hair from his damp brow. She sat beside him, rifle across her knees, eyes on the door. The night would come, and with it more danger. But for this moment they had held. The fire crackled low, casting shadows across the walls. Her child stirred in the cradle, whimpering, then quiet again. Life pressed forward, stubborn as grass through stone. Margaret lifted her chin, her gaze distant, steady. The world beyond might still see Caleb Hart as a gunman, a killer, a name cursed and hunted. But in this cabin he was a man clinging to life, and she was the woman who had given him reason enough to fight for it. And perhaps in the years to come, that would be the story worth remembering.